Hi.
It was the kind of day where everything seemed routine, comfortable, predictable, and reassuring. The early morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as I poured myself a cup of coffee, the smell mingling with the faint aroma of Claire's perfume lingering from her hurried departure to work. Our two kids were still upstairs, their laughter faintly audible as they got ready for school. Life felt normal, or so I thought. The letter arrived just before lunch, tucked unceremoniously into the pile of mail on our porch. It stood out immediately, its envelope stark white and addressed to Claire in precise handwriting that wasn't familiar to me. My curiosity was piqued, but I set it aside, distracted by the mundane rhythm of the day. It wasn't until much later, when I was tidying up the kitchen after dinner, that I noticed the envelope again. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now, but in the moment it felt harmless, even justifiable. Claire and I shared everything. There were no secrets between us. At least that's what I believed. The contents of the letter shattered that illusion in an instant. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The paper contained only a few cryptic sentences. Tuesday, 8 p.m. You know where. The photograph was far more disturbing. It showed Claire, dressed in a sleek black dress I didn't recognize, standing next to a man I'd never seen before. They were smiling, their body language intimate, as if they shared a secret the rest of the world wasn't privy to. My mind raced, grappling with the implications. The man, who was he? A coworker? A friend? Something more? I tried to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation, but the knot tightening in my stomach suggested otherwise. Questions swirled in my head, each more unsettling than the last. Why hadn't Claire mentioned this meeting? Why was the note so cryptic, and why did the photograph feel so deliberate? The next few days were a haze of observation and doubt. I tried to act normal, hiding my unease as I went through the motions of our daily life. Claire didn't seem any different, her demeanor calm and affectionate, her routine unchanged. But now, every moment felt like a potential clue. I noticed the way she glanced at her phone more frequently, the way she seemed distracted during dinner, the way her smile sometimes faltered when she thought I wasn't looking. Tuesday arrived with a sense of inevitability. I spent the day oscillating between anger, fear, and a gnawing curiosity. By the time evening rolled around, I'd convinced myself I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. Claire left the house around 7:30, her explanation vague but plausible. "I'm meeting a friend," she'd said, kissing me lightly on the cheek. "Don't wait up." The words hung in the air long after she'd gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I grabbed my coat and car keys, determination overriding any lingering doubts. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I couldn't ignore the growing weight of suspicion. If Claire wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would have to find it myself. The address on the envelope wasn't far. A private club nestled discreetly in the heart of downtown. I parked a block away, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The street was quiet, the night air crisp and filled with the faint hum of distant traffic. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But the thought of returning home without answers was unbearable. The club's entrance was unmarked, its heavy wooden door blending seamlessly with the building's facade. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and faint traces of cigar smoke. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows across the polished floors. A hostess greeted me with a polite smile, but I barely registered her words as I scanned the room. And there she was. Claire sat at a table near the back, her posture relaxed but poised, a glass of wine in her hand. She was laughing, her head tilted slightly as she leaned toward the man from the photograph. He was speaking animatedly, his gestures confident, his smile magnetic. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. I felt a surge of emotion. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation, not yet. I needed to understand what was happening before I acted. I found a corner to sit in, far enough to avoid being noticed but close enough to observe. As I watched them, the knot in my stomach tightened. This wasn't just a friendly meeting. There was an intimacy in their interaction, a familiarity that spoke volumes. For the next hour, I sat there, grappling with the reality unfolding before me. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, suddenly felt like a carefully constructed illusion. When Claire finally left, the man walked her to the door, their parting gestures casual but charged with unspoken meaning. I stayed behind, letting the moments replay in my mind. The questions I had carried into the night had only multiplied, their answers buried beneath layers of secrecy and deceit. As I finally stepped back into the cool night air, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Whatever secrets Claire was hiding, I would uncover them. And when I did, there would be no going back. The next morning, the world felt both sharper and more surreal. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed overly bright, mocking the heaviness in my chest. Claire moved through the kitchen with her usual efficiency, pouring coffee and packing lunches, her demeanor as calm and composed as ever. But now, every glance, every gesture, felt like part of an elaborate performance. I couldn't shake the memory of her laughter, the easy way she'd leaned toward that man in the club. The image replayed in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. I went through the motions of my day, struggling to focus on work. The hours dragged, my thoughts consumed by the events of the previous night. The club, the note, the photograph. They all pointed to a secret life Claire had carefully hidden from me. I kept asking myself the same questions. Who was that man? How long had this been going on? And why? No matter how much I turned it over in my mind, the pieces refused to fit together. By evening, my frustration had reached a breaking point. I knew I couldn't confront Claire, not yet. I needed more information, something solid that would force her to tell me the truth. My thoughts kept circling back to the photograph that had arrived with the letter. It was too deliberate, too precise to be random. Someone had sent it to me on purpose. But who? And what was their motive? I retrieved the envelope from the kitchen drawer where I'd stashed it. Examining it again, I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint markings on the back, as if someone had pressed too hard while writing on a different piece of paper. I grabbed a pencil and began shading lightly over the surface, revealing an address and a partial phone number. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever had sent the letter wanted me to find this. The address was in a part of town I didn't frequent, a neighborhood known for its mix of old warehouses and newer office buildings. The next day after work, I decided to check it out. The building was nondescript, its brick facade blending in with the others on the street. A simple sign above the door read Vanguard Enterprises. The name meant nothing to me, but the curiosity tugging at me left no room for hesitation. Inside, the reception area was sparse but polished, with modern furniture and a single receptionist behind a sleek desk. I gave her a name, an alias I'd come up with on the drive over, and asked to speak with someone about a discreet inquiry. The receptionist raised an eyebrow but made a call. Minutes later, a man in a tailored suit appeared, his expression professional but guarded. He introduced himself as Lucas and led me to a small conference room. The moment we were alone, Lucas's demeanor shifted. His polite professionalism gave way to a sharper intensity as he leaned forward and asked, "What do you want to know?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, I showed him the photograph, watching his reaction closely. His eyes flicked over it, and though his expression didn't change, I sensed a flicker of recognition. "Why don't you start by telling me who sent this?" I said, keeping my tone even. Lucas's reply was measured, almost cautious. He explained that Vanguard Enterprises was a private investigations firm specializing in sensitive matters. The photograph and letter had likely come from one of their contractors, someone who believed I needed to know what was happening. "We don't take sides," he said. "We deal in information. What you choose to do with it is up to you." His words left me reeling. A private investigation? That meant someone else knew about Claire and her secrets, someone who had decided to bring me into their web. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it the man from the club? Someone Claire worked with? Or was it entirely unrelated? Lucas wouldn't divulge who had hired them, citing confidentiality agreements, but he did confirm one thing. Claire had been under observation for months. I left Vanguard Enterprises with more questions than answers. The drive home felt surreal, the city lights blurring as I tried to process everything. Claire's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was part of something bigger, something I didn't yet understand. For the first time, I felt a pang of fear. What if this wasn't just about an affair? What if Claire was involved in something dangerous, something that could hurt not just her but all of us? That night, I barely slept. The next day, I started piecing together everything I knew. The photograph, the club, the investigation. They all pointed to a hidden world I hadn't even suspected existed. I began tracking Claire's movements more closely, noting when she left the house, where she went, and who she met. Each new observation added another layer to the puzzle, but none of it brought me closer to the truth. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Claire left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. It buzzed with a notification, and before I could think, I picked it up. The message was from an unknown number, and it read, "We need to meet. He's asking questions." My blood ran cold. Whoever had sent the message knew about me, knew I was digging into Claire's secrets. I put the phone down quickly, my mind racing. The message confirmed what I had feared. I was now part of whatever this was. The only question was whether I could uncover the truth before it was too late. The moment I read the message, my instincts screamed at me to put the phone down and step away. The words lingered in my mind like a shadow, heavy and unrelenting. "We need to meet. He's asking questions." My heart pounded as I struggled to make sense of it. Who was he? Was it me? And if so, what kind of questions had I stumbled into that were concerning enough to warrant a clandestine meeting? I moved the phone back to where Claire had left it, my hands trembling. The sound of the shower running upstairs felt like a countdown, urging me to decide what to do next. For a fleeting moment, I considered confronting her immediately, but the uncertainty of her reaction, coupled with the growing sense that this situation was far more dangerous than I'd realized, stopped me. Instead, I slipped into my office, my mind buzzing with a new plan. That night, I began piecing together a timeline of everything I had uncovered so far. The photograph, the private club, the cryptic letter, and now this message. Each fragment hinted at a larger story, one I still couldn't see clearly. I needed leverage, something that could shift the balance of power in my favor. It was no longer just about betrayal. It was about understanding the full extent of the web Claire had spun and what dangers it might pose to me and our family. The next morning, I called in sick to work and decided to take a risk. Armed with the address and partial phone number I'd uncovered from the envelope, I began digging deeper. My first stop was a public records office, where I searched for connections to the name Vanguard Enterprises. What I found was a labyrinth of shell companies, each more opaque than the last. It was clear this wasn't a simple investigation firm. It was a front for something far more complex. As I left the records office, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an unfamiliar address, the subject line reading, "Stop digging." My breath caught as I opened it. The body of the email was brief but chilling. "You're in over your head. Walk away before it's too late." The message felt like a warning, but it also confirmed what I had suspected. Someone was watching me, and they didn't want me to uncover the truth. The email only fueled my determination. That afternoon, I returned to Vanguard Enterprises. Lucas, the man who had initially met with me, was visibly uneasy when I walked into the office unannounced. He tried to deflect my questions, but I pressed harder, leveraging the information I had uncovered about the company's shell operations. Finally, he relented, his voice low and urgent as he spoke. According to Lucas, Vanguard had been hired by a third party to monitor Claire. The specifics of their assignment were confidential, but he hinted that Claire's activities extended far beyond what I had imagined. "She's involved with people who don't play by the rules," he said, his tone grim. "If I were you, I'd stop asking questions. People who dig too deep don't always like what they find." His words hung heavily in the air as I left the building. The stakes had shifted again, and the lines between personal betrayal and something much larger had blurred. Claire wasn't just hiding an affair. She was entangled in something far more dangerous. And now so was I. That evening, I returned home with a new sense of urgency. Claire's demeanor was unchanged, her routine as polished as ever. It was almost maddening, the way she moved through our shared life as if everything was normal. But now, I saw it for what it was. A facade, carefully constructed to conceal the truth. The message on her phone still gnawed at me. I knew I couldn't afford to wait any longer. After dinner, I quietly slipped her phone into my pocket while she stepped away to put the kids to bed. I locked myself in the bathroom and began combing through her messages. What I found was a collection of exchanges that confirmed my worst fears. Conversations with the man from the photograph, references to arrangements and deadlines, and mentions of someone referred to only as the broker. The name sent a chill through me. Every message painted a picture of a woman deeply embedded in a world I didn't recognize. It was as though the Claire I knew had been replaced by a stranger. Someone calculated, secretive, and willing to take risks I couldn't begin to understand. But one message stood out among the rest. It was dated a week earlier and read, "If he finds out, everything falls apart." I returned the phone to where she had left it, my mind racing. It was clear that Claire's actions weren't just about protecting herself. She was protecting someone else. But who? And why? I needed answers, but I also needed to stay ahead of whatever forces were closing in around us. That night, as Claire slept beside me, I made a decision. The time for passive observation was over. If I wanted the truth, I would have to confront her directly. But I also knew that a simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan, one that would force her to reveal everything while keeping me one step ahead of whoever was watching. The next day, I began preparing. I secured copies of all the evidence I had gathered, storing them in multiple locations. I reached out to an old friend with connections in law enforcement, someone I could trust to intervene if things went south. And I began piecing together the questions that demanded answers. When the moment came, I would be ready. But for now, all I could do was wait, the tension building like a storm on the horizon. The truth was out there, tangled in lies and danger, and I was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The confrontation I had planned so meticulously arrived with little fanfare. The days leading up to it were a blur of preparations, each step measured and deliberate. I felt the weight of the evidence I had collected, knowing that once I laid it all out, there would be no return to the life I once knew. My suspicions had morphed into something far more sinister, and with every passing day, the stakes seemed to climb higher. That evening, I waited until the house was quiet. The kids were asleep, their soft breathing a comforting rhythm in the stillness. Claire sat in the living room, her legs tucked beneath her as she scrolled through her phone. She looked calm, serene even, but I couldn't shake the image of her as the woman from the messages and photographs. Someone deeply entwined in a world I didn't understand. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding. When she looked up at me, her smile faltered. She must have sensed the gravity in my expression. I sat down across from her, the folder containing the evidence resting heavily in my lap. Without a word, I slid it across the coffee table toward her. She hesitated, her hand hovering over it before finally opening it. The silence stretched as she flipped through the pages. Her face remained unreadable, but I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the edges of the documents. When she reached the end, she closed the folder and looked at me, her expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. I told her I needed the truth. No more deflections, no more lies. I laid out everything I had discovered, the messages, the meetings, the involvement of Vanguard Enterprises. I didn't raise my voice or accuse her outright. Instead, I let the facts speak for themselves, my tone steady but unyielding. For a long moment, Claire said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to talk. Her words came haltingly at first, as though she were carefully weighing each one. She admitted that she had been working with the broker, a shadowy figure who operated on the fringes of legality. According to her, it had started as a desperate attempt to solve a financial crisis we had faced years ago, a crisis she had kept from me. She described how she had been drawn deeper into the broker's network, performing small tasks at first, but gradually becoming more involved. Her dealings with the man from the photograph were part of a larger operation, one she had tried to extricate herself from but couldn't without severe consequences. The messages I had found, she explained, were warnings from the broker's associates, who had begun to suspect that I was becoming a liability. Her words left me reeling. It was more than I had imagined. The betrayal compounded by the danger she had exposed us to. I wanted to scream, to demand why she hadn't trusted me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning. But beneath the anger was a deeper emotion. Fear. Claire wasn't just complicit. She was ensnared, a pawn in a game she had no control over. I asked her why she had stayed silent for so long, why she had chosen to face this alone rather than confide in me. Her answer was simple but devastating. She had wanted to protect me. She believed that the less I knew, the safer I would be. But her efforts to shield me had only drawn me further into the web she was caught in. The rest of the night was spent discussing our next steps. Claire revealed everything she knew about the broker and his operation, though much of it was fragmented and incomplete. What became clear was that we couldn't face this alone. The danger was too great, the stakes too high. I contacted my friend in law enforcement, providing them with the evidence I had gathered. They promised to investigate discreetly, though their tone suggested they understood the gravity of what we were dealing with. The days that followed were tense and uncertain. Claire's usual composure began to crack, her anxiety manifesting in restless movements and sleepless nights. I found myself torn between anger and a lingering sense of love, the two emotions warring within me as I tried to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the person she had revealed herself to be. Then, one evening, a package arrived at our doorstep. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a note that read, "This is your only warning. Stop now." The message sent a chill through me, but it was the contents of the drive that truly shook me. It contained surveillance footage of me, Claire, and the kids. The message was clear: we were being watched. That night, I made a decision. This had gone far enough. The threat to my family was no longer abstract. It was immediate and personal. I told Claire that we needed to leave, to disappear until we could ensure our safety. She hesitated, the weight of her choices evident in her eyes, but eventually, she agreed. As we packed what little we could carry, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. The life we had built, the illusions we had maintained, were gone. All that mattered now was survival. The truth had come at a cost, but it had also given me a purpose: to protect my family at all costs, even if it meant walking into the unknown. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we drove away from the only home we had ever known. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and unanswered questions. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only sound, broken occasionally by Claire's quiet sighs and the soft murmurs of the kids sleeping in the back seat. Dawn painted the horizon in muted hues of pink and orange, but I barely noticed. My mind raced with thoughts of the unknown, the choices that had brought us to this moment, and the peril that loomed over us like a storm cloud. We had driven through the night, our few possessions crammed into the trunk. Every shadow on the road felt like a threat, every passing car a potential danger. I glanced at Claire, her profile illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. She looked tired, her face lined with worry and something else. Remorse, perhaps, or fear. For the first time in weeks, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. She had made terrible choices, but she had also been ensnared by forces far beyond her control. The safe house was a modest cabin deep in the woods, arranged by my contact in law enforcement. It was isolated, secure, and outfitted with the basics we would need to lay low. As we pulled into the gravel driveway, I felt a flicker of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, we were off the grid, away from the prying eyes of the broker and his associates. But the relief was short-lived, overshadowed by the knowledge that this was only a temporary reprieve. The first few days at the cabin were tense. Claire and I avoided discussing the situation, each of us retreating into our own thoughts. The kids, blissfully unaware of the true nature of our circumstances, treated it like an adventure, their laughter a rare bright spot in an otherwise grim reality. I found solace in routine, chopping wood, preparing meals, and reinforcing the cabin's defenses. Each task gave me a sense of control, however fleeting. But the silence between Claire and me couldn't last. Late one evening, after the kids had gone to bed, she approached me as I sat by the fire, her expression heavy with emotion. She began to speak, her voice trembling as she apologized. Not just for the secrets and the lies, but for the danger she had brought into our lives. She confessed that she had been desperate, that her initial involvement with the broker had been a mistake she couldn't undo. Her words were raw, filled with regret, but also a plea for understanding. I listened, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and a lingering sense of love. When she finished, I told her the truth, that I didn't know if I could forgive her, but that we needed to work together if we had any hope of protecting our family. The conversation ended not with resolution but with a fragile truce, an acknowledgement of the precarious situation we found ourselves in. The next morning, a new complication arose. A package arrived, left on the porch sometime during the night. Inside was another USB drive and a single sheet of paper with the words, "You can't hide." The USB contained more surveillance footage, this time of the cabin and its surroundings. It was clear. The broker knew where we were. Panic set in, but it was quickly replaced by determination. I contacted my law enforcement friend, relaying the new threat and pleading for immediate action. They promised to escalate the situation, but I could hear the doubt in their voice. The broker's network was vast and well hidden, and bringing him down would take time we didn't have. That night, as we huddled in the cabin, I realized we couldn't keep running. We needed to confront this head-on, to find a way to sever the broker's grip once and for all. Claire and I devised a plan, one that relied on leveraging the very thing the broker had used against us: information. Using the surveillance footage and the messages Claire had received, we would piece together enough evidence to expose his operations to the authorities. The following days were a blur of activity. Claire and I worked tirelessly, combing through every piece of data we had, cross-referencing names, locations, and transactions. The picture that emerged was staggering. A sprawling network of illicit activities, from money laundering to blackmail. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. We knew that if the broker discovered what we were doing, there would be no second chances. Finally, we had enough. I contacted my law enforcement friend again, arranging a secure drop-off for the evidence. The meeting took place under the cover of darkness, in an empty parking lot miles from the cabin. As I handed over the files, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. We had done our part, but now we were at the mercy of forces beyond our control. The next 48 hours were agonizing. We stayed glued to the news, waiting for any indication that the operation had been exposed. When the announcement finally came, it was both a victory and a warning. The authorities had raided several locations linked to the broker, dismantling key parts of his network. But the man himself remained elusive, his whereabouts unknown. As we packed up the cabin and prepared to move again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The broker might have been weakened, but he wasn't defeated. His shadow loomed over us, a constant reminder of the choices that had brought us here. As we drove away from the cabin, the kids asleep in the back seat once more, I reached for Claire's hand. She hesitated before intertwining her fingers with mine, her grip firm despite the uncertainty ahead. We didn't speak, but in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between us. The road ahead would be difficult, but we would face it together. For now, we were free, and that was enough. The days following our departure from the cabin were a strange mix of relief and lingering paranoia. Every new town we entered felt both like a sanctuary and a potential trap. Claire and I took turns driving, always keeping a watchful eye on the rearview mirror, looking for signs of anyone following us. The kids, blissfully unaware of the gravity of our situation, treated the journey like an extended road trip, their laughter in the back seat a bittersweet reminder of the innocence we were trying to protect. As we moved further from the life we had left behind, I found myself replaying the events of the past few months in my mind. The betrayal, the revelations, the danger. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle that I had yet to fully assemble. Claire and I spoke in hushed tones during the kids' naps, trying to make sense of the broker's influence and how deeply it had seeped into our lives. Despite our newfound unity, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, that this wasn't over. The turning point came in a small motel on the edge of a sleepy mountain town. It was late, the kids already asleep, when a knock at the door jolted us from our uneasy calm. My heart raced as I approached the door, a makeshift weapon, a heavy lamp, gripped tightly in my hand. Claire stood behind me, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. When I opened the door, I was met with a familiar face. My contact in law enforcement. "We need to talk," they said, stepping inside and closing the door behind them. Their tone was grave, their demeanor tense. Over the next hour, they laid out what had happened since the raid. While the operation had successfully dismantled key parts of the broker's network, it had also set off a chain reaction. Associates of the broker were scattering, scrambling to cover their tracks, and in the chaos, new dangers were emerging. But the most chilling revelation was that the broker himself had resurfaced, more determined than ever to silence those who had betrayed him. My contact handed me a burner phone, their expression somber as they explained the steps we needed to take to stay safe. "This isn't just about staying hidden anymore," they said. "You need to think about what comes next. The broker won't stop until he's neutralized, and right now you're one of his biggest threats." After they left, Claire and I sat in silence, the weight of their words pressing down on us. The reality we had been trying to avoid was clear. Running was no longer an option. If we wanted to protect our family, we needed to confront the broker directly. It was a decision that terrified me, but it was also one that filled me with a strange sense of purpose. For too long we had been reacting, playing defense. Now it was time to take control. Over the next few days, we began laying the groundwork for what would be our final stand. Using the burner phone, we contacted my law enforcement friend and coordinated with their team to set a trap for the broker. Claire and I would act as bait, drawing him out with the promise of information that could destroy what remained of his network. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only way to end this once and for all. The meeting was arranged for a remote location, a desolate warehouse on the outskirts of a sprawling industrial park. As we arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Claire's hand trembled as she gripped mine, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I forced a smile, hoping to mask the fear that gnawed at me. We entered the warehouse, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The law enforcement team was stationed nearby, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. When the broker finally appeared, it was as if the air itself shifted. He was nothing like I had imagined. His presence was commanding, his voice calm and measured, but there was an unmistakable menace in his gaze. He spoke to Claire first, addressing her by name, his words laced with a mixture of disdain and amusement. He made it clear that he saw her betrayal as a personal affront, a challenge to his authority that he could not let go unanswered. The next moments unfolded in a blur. As the broker's men moved to secure the location, the law enforcement team sprang into action. Chaos erupted as shouts and gunfire echoed through the warehouse. Claire and I ducked behind a stack of crates, holding each other tightly as the confrontation escalated. My heart pounded as I watched the carefully orchestrated operation unfold, each moment feeling like an eternity. When the dust finally settled, the broker was in custody, his empire dismantled at last. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what we had lost. The life we had known was gone, replaced by a new reality shaped by the choices we had made. As Claire and I emerged from the warehouse, blinking in the harsh sunlight, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. In the weeks that followed, we began rebuilding. The danger was gone, but the scars remained, both visible and invisible. Claire and I committed to starting anew, not just for ourselves but for our children. It wasn't easy, but each day brought small victories. A shared laugh, a moment of peace, a glimmer of hope for the future. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal that had shattered my world had also forced me to confront truths I had long ignored. It had tested me in ways I could never have imagined, revealing strengths I didn't know I possessed. And while the journey had been fraught with pain and uncertainty, it had also led me to a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. As I stood on the porch of our new home, watching the kids play in the yard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was ours to navigate, together. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough.
How was the video? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Leave your thoughts in the comment below. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.